Welcome to Prime 9, the countdown show that covers the very best in baseball. Guaranteed to start arguments, not end them. This week, it's the 9 greatest hitting seasons of all time. Why 9? That's baseball. 9 players, 9 innings, Prime 9. How do you possibly whittle down all the incredible hitting seasons in the history of baseball to just 9? After all, you've got Triple Crown winners.
A home run for Kyle Yastrzemski.
RBI champions. Record setters. And batting champions. So how do you decide which of these amazing hitting years belong in this elite group? Well, the first thing we did was limit ourselves to just 1 season per player. If we didn't, you'd be seeing more than just 1 year from Babe, Barry.
He's done it again!
And to compare players of different eras, we used a stat called OPS plus. That is, their on-base plus slugging percentage in relation to the league average and the ballparks for that year. And as always, the season had to take place in the modern era, which we define as since 1901. So let's begin the countdown of the greatest hitting seasons of all time. Starting with number 9 on Prime 9.
Through the history of baseball, catchers were characterized as men of great endurance, great intelligence, a captaincy of the outcome of the game, who incidentally had to bat because their turn came up once every 9 at-bats.
Of course, that mold was broken from time to time as some catchers emerged as offensive stars. And one had a year for the ages.
The year that Mike Piazza had in 1997 at 362 batting average as a catcher. It's unbelievable.
You see where that ball was? Over his head. Look at that. Look where it went. I don't believe that.
There's a guy who was feared by every team because he could put the ball out of the park and in any part of the park.
Homer by Mike Piazza. One strong man.
He had just as much power to right center field as he did pulling a ball down the left field line. When he made good solid contact, the ball was flying out of the ballpark.
He drove the ball all parts of the field, and he was a deadly hitter, and it showed in that one particular year where those numbers will never be reached again by any catcher.
Well hit left center. This is a big man's homer way out of here.
Piazza's 201 hits and 638 slugging percentage in '97 set the bar for catchers, and he did it while absorbing the punishment of almost 140 games behind the plate.
What an effort by Piazza.
You know, to get down there every day, squat, deal with the pitching staff, your legs, and the endurance that's necessary.
Boy, Piazza has taken a battering to play.
A lot of the great catchers you talk to feel the same way about that season because they've been there. They've been to war. They know what it's like to be behind the plate and to suffer like they do. And for Mike Piazza to do that, quite an achievement.
Nice play by Mike Piazza. What a play.
If you get that kind of production out of your catcher, it's a bonus. He didn't just be an impact player. He was a dominant hitter in the game.
A monstrous home run by Piazza.
Piazza really established himself as the greatest hitting catcher of all time. 97 is obviously remarkable. To be able to do it while you're catching and undergoing physical rigors of that position is just flat out unbelievable. That is something that you probably won't see for a very long time.
And so the greatest hitting catcher checks in at number 9. Number 8 also belongs to the best at his position.
They talk about Honus Wagner as the greatest shortstop of all time. Well, he is.
Bold words given some of the talented players who played at short, but none of them owned his era quite like Wagner.
Honus Wagner was the consummate power hitter in the game in the first decade of the century.
In that decade, Honus led the league in slugging 6 times and won 7 batting titles, but 1 year stood out.
Wagner, of course, had many great seasons, but everybody has a pinnacle season, and I think for Wagner, it was 1908. He led the league in just about every He-Man department. Hits, runs batted in, slugging, total bases, batting average.
.354 seems like a garden variety batting average to lead the league. The National League of 1908 as a whole batted .239. Wagner's batting average was nearly 50% better than the league average.
In that season, the epitome of the dead ball era, Wagner left his peers in his wake with mind-boggling numbers. Those who saw him play were amazed, including the legendary Giant skipper.
John McGraw always said that of all the players he had ever seen, Honus Wagner was the greatest. Not Babe Ruth, not Ty Cobb, Honus Wagner.
Welcome back to Prime 9, featuring the greatest hitting seasons of all time. You've seen the 9th and 8th best. We now continue with number 7. The 1927 Yankees are remembered as one of the deadliest teams in baseball history.
This rare assemblage of talent was called Murderers Row.
At a time when seasons were just 154 games, these Yankees won 110. And at the heart of the order were two names that are linked forever.
To have Ruth Gehrig 3-4 in the lineup must have been a nightmare for opposing pitchers.
Ruth was already established as one of the game's greatest hitters, while Gehrig was quietly coming into his own.
Babe Ruth loved the limelight, loved to be in the focus. Gehrig was much more workmanlike, behind the scenes.
But in 1927, Larapin Lou stepped out of the shadows with the best season any first baseman would ever have.
That was the season that he told baseball, I am as great a player as my teammate Babe Ruth.
It was the year Lou's bat did all the talking.
Be sure to keep the arms free from the body, back, and ready to hit.
Gehrig had a fierce, combative spirit. When he went up there to hit, he had one purpose: to knock the hell out the ball.
Gehrig was known to hit the most ferocious line drives in all directions. And if you look at his total of doubles and triples, you can see that. What he did in 1927, with the 175 runs batted in, is even more phenomenal. Ruth hit 60 home runs. So Gehrig came to bat 60 times that year after Ruth had cleaned the bases.
Lou Gehrig was the model of consistency his entire career, but one year stands out as the 7th best hitting season of all time.
In 1927, he hit 47 home runs, not his career high. He drove in 175, not his career high. So if you look at slugging, if you look at on-base percentage, if you look at the two of them combined as OPS, which nowadays is very common, the sabermetric approach would probably yield you 1927 as the greatest of his seasons in combination.
In 1956, I would have been 25 years old. I finally became, a ball player, I guess.
A ball player who, 5 years into his career, would finally realize his full potential, showcasing his incredible skills. And in 1956, Mantle would write his name into the record books with one phenomenal season.
He was a magnificent athlete and a great ball player. And it was one of those years where everything fell into place for him.
This was the year where he moved to the big stage, so to speak. It's what gave him prominence. There are not many that a player has where he achieves so much in so many categories and does so well.
Boom! Mantle belts it over the fence in right field.
Here you have Mickey Mantle at the peak of his powers in 1956. He hits .353, 52 home runs. He drives in 130 runs, wins the Triple Crown.
And the Triple Crown that he won wasn't just the American League Triple Crown, it was the Major League Triple Crown. In other words, he led the majors in homers, the majors in batting average, and the majors in RBIs. No one has done that since.
And best of all, he led the Yankees to a World Series title. Mantle capped off his incredible season by winning the first of 3 Most Valuable Player awards, but they might as well have been Oscars. For the Mick was the leading man of his era, and the '56 season his greatest performance in a lifetime of legendary roles.
He's a glamorous player playing on the most glamorous stage in all of sports, Yankee Stadium. I mean, there it is. There's your script straight out of Hollywood.
Welcome back to Prime 9, featuring the greatest hitting seasons of all time. Piazza and Wagner checked in at 9 and 8, respectively, followed by Gehrig and the man with the perfect baseball name, which means it's time for number 5.
To say which is Ty Cobb's greatest season is like saying which is Shakespeare's greatest play. I mean, there's a lot to pick from. Cobb in 1911 probably hit his pinnacle. And I think Joe Jackson's charge at him with a 400 average had something to do with it.
The presence of Shoeless Joe bearing down on him in almost every offensive category must have pushed the fiercely competitive Cobb to new heights.
248 hits was the most he ever had. Runs scored, runs batted in, slugging. Ty Cobb excelled even himself that year.
Cobb was the best in the game, and no one knew it better than Ty himself.
This cocky, confident attitude was typical of Ty. Cobb thought he could do anything.
The Georgia Peach approached every game like it was war, and every at-bat was a battle.
Cobb probably is as well known for how fierce he was and unrelenting he was as a base runner and an outfielder as a hitter.
Cobb would win 12 batting titles in his career, but it was his 5th straight in 1911 that helped him make this season one of the all-time best.
He had a philosophy: never let yourself get out of a game without at least one hit. And you have to believe that kind of fanaticism when you look at a lifetime batting average of .367. That's over 24 years. There's something wrong with that. There's something maniacal about it. That just doesn't happen.
Will you explain why you stand in the extreme corner of the box, Raj?
Well, it gives me the advantage of stepping in and hitting the ball to any field.
Hornsby had a very unusual stance, a very unusual grip. He was an unconventional player all the way around.
But the numbers he compiled in his 23-year career have certainly stood the test of time.
If you grew up with baseball even in the 1960s and 70s, and were asked the question, who's the greatest right-handed hitter? Your answer had to be Rogers Hornsby.
Hornsby was obsessed with hitting. When asked once what he did during the off-season, he said, "I stare out the window and wait for spring to come." And when the spring of 1922 came, he was ready.
In that season, he had the kind of year that no one could have expected, and least of all, from a hitting standpoint, you don't expect that kind of production from a second baseman.
What Hornsby did in terms of power and production that year still stands alone among second basemen today.
What was Hornsby's difference from all the second basemen who had gone before and those who had come after? It was the extraordinary total base power.
He led the league with 42 home runs, which in 1922 was quite a large number. In fact, it was a new National League record.
Hornsby was also in the midst of a stretch of 5 consecutive seasons in which he averaged over 400. No one else has equaled this string of success in the history of the game.
If not for Babe Ruth, you'd look back at the 1920s and say that was the age of Hornsby. Just a remarkable player.
We have not seen the kind of play offensively from a second baseman that Hornsby gave us in that great Triple Crown year.
Toward the end of the 20th century, Barry Bonds was already a 3-time MVP and a certain Hall of Famer. But his feats were now overshadowed by other sluggers of his era.
Number 70!
That would change in 2001.
Even before that year, he was as good a all-around player as you were going to see in the history of the game. And then in that year, to just watch what he did, it was unbelievable.
Bonds began the year 6 home runs shy of 500 and appeared in a hurry to get there.
Bonds has hit the historic 500th homer. He joins his godfather, Willie Mays. He joins Willie McCovey.
At the age of 37, at a time when most players are winding down their careers, Bonds appeared to be getting better. And he embarked on a home run pace that lifted his legend to new heights.
Bonds simply frightened the rest of the National League.
Bonds continues to draw walks at a very, very high pace.
Couldn't pitch to him. Wouldn't pitch to him. Wouldn't think of pitching to him.
Don't expect Bonds to see anything to swing at here.
And then to get that one pitch and pow!
Did he do it again? He's done it again! Look out, Mark McGwire! Barry Bonds is on your tail!
You stop everything you're doing to watch what Barry Bonds was gonna do.
Number 67, number 68, number 69.
You just sat there every night trying to see, did he hit it again? Did he hit another one? Another one?
The all-time record set in '98 was now in sight.
Looks like number 70 for Barry Bonds, and it is, tying the all-time record.
Everybody was just caught up in this magical chase that nobody ever thought would come close again to Mark McGwire, and Barry Bonds shattered it.
And Barry Bonds is now the home run king.
Who knows how Bonds was able to do what was thought impossible at his age? But it was his entire body of work that makes this year the third best of all time.
The 73 home runs, the record for bases on balls, the slugging percentage record, the Ruth record that nobody ever thought would be surpassed. These now belong to Barry Bonds.
We now return to Prime 9, where this week we're focusing on the greatest hitting seasons in the history of baseball. To qualify for the show, a hitter had to have a season that almost defied belief. And so far, we've seen some great ones. Now it's time for the very best. 2 years that, in the long history of the game, rise above the rest. We begin with number 2. When Ted Williams made the majors in 1939, he had no qualms about what his future would hold.
The lanky Red Sox rookie told people flatly that he intended to become the greatest hitter in baseball history.
In 1941, the 22-year-old Williams would back those words up, but his greatest season ever actually began on the wrong foot.
In spring training, he fractured a bone in his right foot, and he seemed to favor that right foot a little bit, stayed back a little bit more.
Maybe it helped, because Teddy Ballgame had a sensational first half.
Ted's bat has generated rocket speed.
Williams was hitting .405 at the All-Star break, and he used the Midsummer Classic to prove that this just might be a magical year.
Bottom of the ninth, the American League trailed by 1, had 2 on and 2 out. Ted Williams at bat.
Williams swings, there's a high drive, a home run.
Hitting that home run in the All-Star game in the 9th inning was certainly a big thrill, and I'll never forget the rest of my life.
And there was so much more to come in the season's second half. For while Joe DiMaggio's hitting streak was stealing the spotlight, Williams was destroying American League pitching.
He wasn't jabbing or beating out infield hits or bunts. He was hitting .400 with power.
Ted would lead the majors in home runs, on base percentage, slugging percentage, runs, walks, and OPS. But the most legendary number of all came down to the final day of the season.
I was still hitting well over .400 at the beginning of the last week. And then I ran into just a little bit of a cold streak, and before the last day, I was down to .399.6.
With a doubleheader that day in Philadelphia, Ted could have taken a seat and technically finished the season at .400, but he would have none of it.
I think if I were Ted, I would sit out today.
Joe Cronin came to me and he said, Ted, you don't even have to play today. He said, officially, you're .400. I said, hell no, Joe, I want to play.
Deep in his psyche, something said to him, You're not going to be the greatest hitter that ever lived if you sit down in the face of a challenge of this magnitude.
Williams would achieve baseball immortality by going 6 for 8 in that doubleheader to finish with a .406 average, still the last man to hit 400.
Any 400 season is remarkable, but it's the way he did it. There's something marvelously heroic about it.
Which brings us to the greatest hitting season of all time. It's been almost a century since he first stepped to the plate, but this honor could go to only one man.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Bambino, Babe Ruth.
The question is, which of his legendary seasons would it be?
I could look at 1920. Some could look at 1923. Others could look at 1927.
1921 was the best.
Remarkably, Ruth had still been a part-time pitcher for Boston just 2 seasons prior, and had just completed his first year as a Yankee when he rewrote the record books.
Babe Ruth was trying to prove that what happened in 1920 was no freak, and that he was really Babe Ruth.
If there ever was a time that I'm going to try to hit a home run, it's sure going to be today for you boys.
In 1921, Ruth broke almost every record he had set the previous season, and the word Ruthian became a part of the baseball lexicon.
We are talking about an era when major league leaders in home runs might be 13, 14. 59 home runs was an unheard of number. And in fact, Babe Ruth out-homered most of the teams in the American League that season.
What a season it's been for the Babe.
For the 3rd consecutive season, he set a Major League home run record.
The Bambino was crowned King of SWAT by manager Huggins.
He just tore up the record book, threw it out the window, and started writing new pages.
I think that's going to be a record to stand for a long time.
That would also be the case for the records he set that year for extra base hits and total bases, marks that still stand today. It was, quite simply, a season that helped change the game.
What Ruth accomplished in 1921 brought baseball into the new era. It was hitting that went beyond the furthest extremities of the imagination.
Well, we can't end the show without a few more fun facts about Babe.
Fastball, curveball.
His 1921 season also brought the Yankees their first World Series appearance, and Ruth would play in 6 more through 32.
First home run of the series.
In those 7 fall classics, Babe did just fine, hitting .347 with 15 home runs and 30 RBI in 36 games. And remember how we said early in the show that there'd be only 1 season per player? Well, here's a good reason why. The top 10 highest OPS seasons ever belong to just 3 men. Ted Williams with 2, Barry Bonds with 4, and Babe with 4. No surprise they also own our top 3 hitting seasons. That's our Prime 9. What's yours?